Asia lecture. So today we're going to be looking at imperialism in Southeast Asia. So as we had left off with last time with South Asia, let's also continue on with the British. Now in the last lecture we talked about the British taking over India, which you see on the X on this map on the left. The British are also in China, as we know that they're in Hong Kong from a previous lecture. And so these two colonies of the British need to be connected. As we have talked about the opium trade, the British are growing opium in India and they're transporting it to China to get silver so they can buy the luxury goods of China. And so these two colonies are going to be connected through maritime trade. And so the British are going to be interested in Southeast Asia because it occupies a strategic position between the two other colonies. So the British are going to capture Burma, which you see on the little X on the left-hand side above. They're going to conquer that for raw materials and markets. But as far as the navigational trade goes, they're going to, where you see the X on the bottom, they're going to capture the peninsula of Malay. We have talked about this before. That's the Straits of Malacca, and that's a key choke point of trade that the British want to control between India and China so they can make sure that nobody can mess with their transportation of opium from India to China. So they're going to get two colonies here in Southeast Asia. Now, the British rivals, the French, they're also interested in Southeast Asia. And so if you look at this map on the top, Myanmar is what the British had conquered. It was Burma, so it's just a different name. And then, of course, we had talked about that the British are going to get the Malay Peninsula, which is the little piece of white, the isthmus that kind of sticks out in the bottom there. Now, in the right-hand side of this map that you see is green, that is going to be French Indochina. It is composed of the modern-day countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The French wants this for usual imperialistic reasons. It has raw materials and also markets. So this is a very tropical climate, and so there are rubber trees there, as you can see in the top right-hand corner. And rubber is becoming increasingly important in the industrial process. You're going to use it to make all kinds of goods that are attached to machines, like belts, conveyor belts, fan belts, those kinds of things, tires for cars. And so far it hasn't been able, now today it's synthetically made, we make it from oil, but back then these rubber trees, the sap from the rubber trees were the only source of rubber. We hadn't invented the way to make it out of oil yet, or synthetic rubber. And so rubber is going to be a very important crop for resource for the French that they can sell to the rest of the world. In addition to that, the French have colonies, as we will find out, in Africa as well as in the Caribbean, and they need to feed all of these workers that are busy growing, sugar or whatever other thing that they're growing. And so the people in Africa and the Caribbean are not growing food for themselves because they're busy growing cash crops or working in mines. And so the French need a way to feed their colonies all over the world. And so what we get in Indochina is called the rice bowl for the French. It's a great tropical climate for them to grow rice. And so this is going to be a cash crop of sorts. The French are going to grow rice in Southeast Asia and then use it to feed their colonies all around the world. And whatever they have left over, they'll sell for a profit to other imperialist countries to feed their workers as well. So it's not just economic reasons that the French are interested in Indochina. We had also talked about the white man's burden, the idea that white people have this burden that they should go out and bring Christianity and their culture to, quote unquote, the lesser peoples of the world. And so the French, which is a Catholic country, are going to send missionaries to Southeast Asia to try to convert the people from Buddhism to Catholicism. Now, they run in the same problem of ruling Indochina that the British did. There's just not enough French people that are willing or can come over to Indochina and run every little village in Indochina. And so what the French do is what the British did in India. They rule through local elite. So if you're some local tribal leader or you're a village leader, the French will continue to employ you and you'll work for them. And so for the vast majority of the Vietnamese people or the Cambodians or the Laotians, their day-to-day life doesn't change quite as much politically because they were already looking to their local leaders for rule. And so this makes a nice, at least somewhat smoother transition. That isn't to say that the French did not abuse the people in Southeast Asia. They did. They will overwork them, underpay them. They will not let them have any kind of higher authority rather than the local leaders at their little villages. But we do see that the French were going to kind of copy the British in this method of local control. So what we're going to have here is we don't see mass starvation like we did in India, because one of the things that the French are growing is rice. And so they let the villagers keep some of the rice, but then they export the rest. And so in India, if you remember, there was all kinds of starvation because Indian farmers who used to grow food for themselves are now being forced to work in mines, or they're being forced to work on tea plantations or opium plantations. And so they can't eat those things. And so there was starvation because they were focused on growing other things besides food, but not so much here in Indochina. Now, before we leave the French, let's talk about Thailand, or as it was known at that point, Siam. If you look at the map above, squished between Myanmar or Burma, which is a British colony, and Indochina in the green, which is a French colony, we have Thailand. And Thailand is going to be able to stay an independent state. This is one of those examples of an independent state of native-controlled people on the borders of empire. In the United States, one example was the Cherokee Indians, who were able to resist conquest by the United States for a while and create their own state and then later they'll be conquered. But here's another example of in Thailand, they were able to create an independent kingdom. And the reason they're able to stay independent is because the French and the British agreed that this is a good plan. The French and the British are rivals, and they didn't want to come right next to each other. So they thought this was a good buffer state between the two. And so Thailand is able to, through their own efforts and also through British and French consent, able to kind of keep themselves independent, one of the few countries in Asia at this point that's able to do that. So now let's go to the Dutch. The Dutch are in Southeast Asia as well, and we can see this map. They have an extensive amount of holdings in Indonesia. Now, this used to be controlled heavily by the Portuguese, but the Portuguese and the Spanish, their empires are seriously declining. At this point, we have already talked about the Portuguese. We've already talked about the Spanish. But the Portuguese here, they're going to lose control to the Dutch, and it's because the Dutch just have a better way of financing imperialism. They have the joint stock company known as the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. We've talked about that before. And because they're able to get more investors because of the way they're structured, they don't have to depend on the government of the Netherlands to fund them. They're able to get all kinds of investors through their joint stock company, raise all kinds of money, which means they can get better and more ships to control the region than the Portuguese. And so the Dutch are going to kick out the Portuguese, and they're going to have control of most of Indonesia. Now, why are the Dutch interested in this? Well, the same reason they were interested in the last time period. They're interested in it for spices. We're also going to add tea to that as well. Tea and spices are tropical crops, and so the Dutch are going to use this region and the people who live there to grow their spices and tea for export. So the purpose of the Dutch East Indies was to make money, obviously, because it's run by a company. But eventually, the Dutch East India Company is going to go bankrupt. Through a series of mismanagement and competition with the British, they're not able to compete, and so they lose control of this colony. This is very similar to how the British East India Tea Company lost control of India, and the government of England eventually took over India. So here we see a similar process. It starts out as a colony, and then it's going to be switched over to direct control by the Dutch government around 1800. Now, of course, just because a country is controlling it instead of a company, we still don't see that there's going to be Enlightenment reforms. The Dutch they don't give people democracy. They don't try to improve the healthcare very much. They work the workers overmuch. So there's some starvation because we're focusing on growing spices and tea instead of growing food. And so we see an example of native resistance. And this is a big trend that we need to know in each region, examples of native resistance. In India, we talked about resistance with the Sepoy Mutiny. So in China, we've talked about that as well. And so here we have the Java War from 1825 to 1830. It is led not as a populist movement of poor people, but it's led by one of the local Indonesian rulers, and he's mad because he sees that the Dutch are getting more and more and more control over the region, and so he's going to try to lead a rebellion of the people. They're going to follow his lead and try to overthrow the Dutch. Of course, he loses because the Dutch have better access. They've industrialized. They have access to more modern weapons, and they can mass produce those weapons, and so they lose. But here's another example of native resistance to imperialism. So once that's put down, the Dutch are like, okay, so we need to, well, let's make even more profit. And so what they do is they switch the labor system. It's called the cultivation system. And so the Dutch government decrees that all the peasants, or a majority of the peasants in Indonesia, need to give them corvée labor. They need to give them some forced labor of 60 days. So 60 days a year, all of the peasants that this applies to, they have to leave their own farms, they have to leave their own villages, and they have to go work on Dutch-owned plantations to grow spices and tea. This free labor is going to make it so that the Dutch are able to make huge profits because they're not paying for this labor, and so their profits go up. So here's another example of a coerced labor system due to imperialism. Now, just like the British in India, they are going to build infrastructure. The Dutch are going to increase roads and bridges in order to get their raw materials out and their finished goods in. So this is another kind of trend we see in imperialized countries. Then today we're going to finish up, short lecture today, we're going to finish up on the U.S. imperialism in Southeast Asia. So we have talked about this, but the United States has become an imperialist country. And they fight with the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. And because of that war, we had said that the Americans are going to get colonies in the Caribbean, which they're going to take from Spain, like Puerto Rico, but they're also going to get colonies from Spain in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia. And so when the war is over, the Spanish used to control, if we can see on this previous map, you can see the Philippines up here. That used to be a Spanish colony, but due to the Spanish-American War, as part of the peace treaty, the United States is going to take over the Philippines. Now, why did the United States want this? Well, because for all the other imperialist reasons. The United States is a growing industrial country, and they want access to the Philippines' raw materials because they're a tropical climate, and most of the United States is not tropical. There are crops that can grow in Southeast, that can grow in the Philippines that can't grow in the United States. Plus, the Philippines has millions of people, and so it's a market that we get forced to buy our U.S. goods. So that's part of the reason the United States was interested in the Philippines. In addition to that, we've talked about social Darwinism. The Americans believe that they are superior. They have a superior culture. They are a superior race, those kinds of things. And they should be able to control and spread their influence around the world. And the Philippines is just one of those places they want to do that. And then the final reason is we also see the United States with white man's burden. We're going to see missionaries from the United States come to the Philippines. Now, a lot of the people in the Philippines are already Christian. They're Catholic because it was controlled by Spain for a long time. But for U.S. missionaries, that's the wrong kind of Christian. They want them to be Protestant Christians. And so we're going to see U.S. Protestant missionaries come to the Philippines and try to convert people there. Here's another example of a native resistance to imperialism. And so around 1900, there's going to be a Filipino insurrection. The Filipinos are going to be led by a native person named Emilio Aguinaldo, and he is going to lead the Filipinos in an insurrection against the United States control. It's going to last for several years, and it's a pretty ruthless war. The United States is going to send troops, and it's going to be a jungle war. The United States are going to try to find the Filipino insurrectionists, but they're going to be guerrilla forces. So by day, the Filipinos they look like average, ordinary farmers that are working for the U.S., and at nighttime, they grab their guns, and they go out and they try to kill U.S. troops with sneak attacks. This is something what's similar that the United States will experience much later in the next time period in the war in Vietnam. So lots of similarities here. Now eventually the Filipino insurrection is put down. The United States capture Emiliano Aguinaldo, the leader, and then that kind of takes a lot of the wind out of the sails of the rebellion. It's going to go on and off, though, without him for all the way up until the 1940s. But for the most part, the biggest part of the insurrection was when Emiliano was leading the insurrection and he was kind of organizing things. We don't know the number of casualties exactly. The United States was in their interest not to keep track of the people that we killed, and so because it would make people back home think maybe this is a not such a good war. And so estimates vary. I've seen estimates from 400,000 Filipinos were killed up to 1 million. So this is a very large insurrection that the United States is going to have to try to put down. So another example of native insurrection. So that's it for today's lecture. When we come back, we will start in on Africa.